Okay, Daddy lived on Morris Street. He lived in the second block, wasn't it?
224, that was the first
First block.
224 North Morris Street.
And then in the very next block, Horace Short and his family lived, his wife lived there. Well, Horace Short and Elevate were very good friends of Mother and Daddy's.
Uh-huh.
And as a small child, I would go to their house and visit them. And I didn't know him.
This was when? About when?
Oh, I was 4 or 5 years old.
1800.
So 1940.
Yeah, 1940.
Yeah.
And it was really odd because when I met him through my cousin and his best friend on a blind date.
That wasn't 1940.
No.
That was 41.
But anyway, you had just gotten out of the Navy, right?
Well, that would have been 19. I got out in November of 1954.
Okay. But anyway, we went to the movie with Naomi and Jim. It was a blind date.
It was a talking movie, too.
It was in color, probably. When I got home that night, Mother said, "Well, how was your date?" And I said, "He's too old to me." So we dated, I think it was about 2 weeks before we dated again.
Yeah.
And then we dated from then on. For 3
She
years.
She asked me pretty much every day until then.
But that was really ironic that Horace and Elevate lived down there, and he lived in the next block up from them.
Yeah.
I thought. You can tell him about your daddy, what
Yeah.
you told us before. Tell us about when your daddy was sick.
What happened to him?
Well, Daddy was going back a long time. He met my mother in Columbia, South Carolina. He ran a livery stable on the corner of Jervay and Assembly Street, which was right there at the Capitol. And Mom worked out at Camp Jackson, they called it.
Yeah.
Which is Fort Jackson now. That's where David graduated from boot camp.
That's right.
And anyway, after the war, he went to work for Roberts Filter Company in Philadelphia, and they built industrial, commercial city water treating systems. And he traveled all over the country putting those in for Roberts Filter Company. But and it was probably when I was maybe 3 or 4, because he died when I was only 5. He was on a construction site, and a brick fell from way up above and fell down and hit him in the back of the neck and caused a blockage in his carotid artery. But anyway, after that, he wasn't able to do the construction superintendent's job, so they moved back to Gastonia. And I reckon that was I was born in Gastonia, so that would have been 3 or 4 years before I was born at the time that happened. But he ran a Sinclair filling station up on what your mama called Greasy Corner, which is at the corner of Firestone Street and Wilson Boulevard.
Why was it called Greasy Corner?
Well, that's another story.
Okay.
She can tell you that. I think it's because the people that lived there lived
No.
Oh, it might have been because of the greasy food they ate.
Tell your story.
But anyway, the last year or so that he lived, he was bedridden, and I remember two things about him. One, prior to the time we lived on Cherry Street, which had probably been a couple of years or so earlier, we lived at 222 North Morris Street, which was an old home place of some of the family, and he raised rabbits. He had gosh, it must have been rabbit hutches there for probably a whole 600 rabbits.
And this would have been between 1930 and 34.
This was during the Depression.
Yeah.
And folks would and he was running the filling station then also. But he would sell those rabbits to folks, and they would take them home and kill them and dress them and cook them. It was a pretty good business. But after a while, he got so sick that he was bedridden, and that was when we lived over on Cherry Street.
And that was all a result of the injury he got?
That was a result of the injury, and I remember the time we lived on 222 North Morris Street in those rabbit hutches, and we also had a big garden, and we raised pigs and all that kind of stuff, and used to cure hams and shoulders and bacon and all that stuff down in the basement of the house. But on Morris Street, when he was bedridden, my last memory of him was when he was laying in the bed, and I didn't really have an appreciation for what was wrong with him. I just knew that he laid in the bed there all the time.
Yeah.
And he was a very loving and caring father. But then he passed away, and Mom had to go to work because we didn't have any other way of her living. That was during the Depression. But fortunately, she was able to get a job at the Central Bonded Warehouse, which is a cotton warehouse that her brother was the primary owner of, and she became the office manager, and that's the kind of work that she had done when she worked down at Camp Jackson during World War I. But those were good times, even though they were bad times when Daddy died. That was a bad time.
The reason that I heard that it was called Greasy Corner, and this was I'm not sure this is true, but they said a truckload of grease or something turned over there and just spilt all over the place, so they called it Greasy Corner. But there on that corner was a movie house called Carolina Theater. And on Saturday, my brother and I, when we got old enough, he was probably 4, no, maybe a little bit later on. But anyway, Mother would let us walk to that movie, and we'd stay almost all day long watching the movies. They didn't make you leave. You could stay as long as you wanted to. But all the kids in the neighborhood would go there.
Yeah.
And they took care of us. I mean, they kept us safe
It was a daycare.
Yeah, it was. But we enjoyed it.
You told me a story about something about a wagon that one of your neighbors owned that ended up on the top of a building somehow.
I don't remember that.
You don't? Okay. There was a fellow that had a wagon that you and somebody else took apart and put back together on top of a building. You don't remember that story?
Maybe if you give me a little while, I'll tell you.
Okay.
main wagons that I remember, we used to have, in the summertime, we didn't have electric refrigerators or anything. We had ice boxes. And they would deliver ice they just had a regular run down to the neighborhood, and they'd stop at each house.
And his name was Bob White, and he was black.
The Iceman.
Mm-hmm.
And they would chip off whatever size block of ice you had. And then people had cards where if they weren't going to be at home, they would turn that card to what size block they wanted. And usually the ice box, I don't know how Bob White knew where the ice box was or how to get in, but he would chop that ice off and put it in the ice box for him.
It was usually 25 or 50 pounds.
Yeah, but anyway, one of the things that he was famous for, and everybody liked about him, when he chipped that ice, he could really chip it and just make it split where he wanted. But he always made sure he chipped some little pieces for you, so the kids in the neighborhood would go to that ice wagon and they'd get those pieces, and that was good refreshment.
A treat.
Yeah.
One time he came to our house, and we had a fence, pretty high around the house, and Bob White was about that wide.
At least.
He was a hefty man.
Yeah.
But he could throw that ice over his back and no problem. Well, we had a German police dog that didn't like blacks, didn't like Bob White at all. Well, usually if we were out in the yard playing, he didn't pay any attention to General because he knew that we would, well, he starts in the gate with that 50 pounds of ice on his back, and he gets halfway, and General was up under the edge of the house, and we weren't paying any attention, and he came out from under that house and chased Bob White, and Bob White jumped that fence with that 50 pounds of ice on his shoulder and was still running the last time we saw him.
He didn't drop the ice?
He didn't drop it. It was
he was agile.
But he was a good man. He really was.
Yeah, he'd sing sometimes when he was at work.
Yeah.
But in the wintertime, he drove, he had a coal wagon. And with that same team of horses, he would deliver coal.
And when he retired, I remember he had a vegetable stand up there on Linwood Road.
Did he? I never did know that.
Now, when would this have been?
When he delivered ice?
Yeah.
Probably in early 40s.
Well, that would have been
Or late 30s.
in the late 30s and during even some during World War I or World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He worked for Adams Ice and Coal
Uh-huh.
and Star Hannah, who was our cousin. He was the manager of that place.
Uh-huh.
So he knew all the goings on there.
Now, tell me, how was it that Star, his wife was Geneva,
Yeah.
and they were your mom's family?
Yeah, they were. They are. Star was a Hannah.
Uh-huh.
And Geneva was a Wilson.
Okay.
And Mom was a Wilson. And Mom's daddy and Geneva's daddy were brothers.
Okay, so they were cousins. And Aunt Tay was?
She was Mom's sister.
Sister.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then she had a couple other sisters who passed on kind of early in their lives, and she had a brother, Brown Wilson, who was one of the founders of what's now Caramont, or Gaston Memorial Hospital.
That was Aunt Mary's husband.
Okay.
And another brother, T.W. Wilson, he worked for
Bethune, a bank in Bethune.
no, well he worked for the government. He was located in Charlotte, and it was a bank, and I don't remember now. It was a federal thing. It was kind of a it wasn't a WPA, but it was kind of a reconstruction department of the government. I don't remember that now, but anyway. Then he later was president of a bank in Bethune, South Carolina. And they were similar but different. They were both real great fellows.
Mm-hmm. They sure are. Well, I didn't know Brown, but I knew T.W. Brown died before we were married.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
They were very intelligent.
He died of a heart attack at home. I
He
remember
was
Aunt
only
Mary.
48 years old.
When you got married in 1957,
56.
that's right.
Wasn't that 18?
1918?
1918.
How did Floyd and he married
Buddy.
Aunt Faye, and then Uncle Bill married Aunt Dot. What was the sequence of that?
Well, during World War II, Bill, who took Daddy's place as a construction superintendent with Robert's Filter Company,
I didn't know that.
and he didn't take Daddy's place, but after he had graduated from high school, Robert's Filter Company offered him a job, and he worked his way up to where he was a construction superintendent for them for a couple of years right before World War II started. And when World War II started, he volunteered and went into and joined the Army Air Force, and he was a captain in the Army Air Force. He was a bombardier on a B-24, and he got married when he was a construction superintendent for Robert's Filter Company. He met Dot, who was to become his wife. Her name was Dot Harvey. She lived in Sheffield, Alabama, and they got married while he was in the service. It was towards, I think it was after he finally got back from overseas. He flew in the South Pacific and New Guinea and all those places down through there. And he got married during World War II. Floyd, who was 5 years younger, and who was 5 years younger than Bill, and 5 years older than me, joined the Marine Corps at the beginning of World War II. And he went through boot camp at Parris Island, and he was in the 5th Marine Division. And I know one of the battles, he was in the first wave of troops that came ashore on Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
And but he got married after he got back out of the military after the war. What else were you?
That's what I was asking. Was how? So Bill got married first.
Yeah.
And then
He got married about like 1942 or 3
Yeah.
or 4. And Floyd got married probably in 46 or 7.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. Floyd became he went to work for
Bayside.
Do what?
Was it Bayside Bonding Warehouse?
Uh,
That was where Mimi worked.
Mom worked for Central Bonding Warehouse.
Well, it was Bayside where Floyd worked.
Floyd worked for Broad Street Bonding
Oh,
Warehouse.
okay, you're right, I'm sorry.
And he liked taking pictures, is that right?
He worked
Yeah,
for WBT.
he also
Oh.
worked on the side as a photographer for
Yeah.
WBTV.
That's what he was doing when he died.
He could do anything. I mean, he could just
He really
absolutely
could.
do anything.
He was a gem of a person, he truly was.
And Bill, when Lewis Motors was started right after World War II, right after World War II anyway, Bill went to Georgia Tech, and they had their first child, and so he had to come home and go to work, and he went to work for what was Lewis Motors, and it was owned jointly by Buddy Lewis and Brown Wilson, who was Bill's uncle.
Yeah.
Buddy Lewis was a famous baseball player for the Washington Senators. And when they built it, when they first started Lewis Motors, of all places for it to have started, it was at an old livery stable where the Gaston, right there where the Gaston County Department of Social Services and the courthouse. It was on the corner of Marietta Street and one street over from Airline.
So the Long Avenue.
Yeah, probably Long Avenue.
Was
It
that
used to be a great old big livery stable.
Craig Wilson? Was it Craig Wilson?
Craig and Wilson had founded that livery stable, and they also had a building on Main Street in Gastonia, which was on the corner of Marietta Street and Main Street, and it was a carriage building and all that kind of stuff. And the livery stable was over about a block and a half across the railroad from it. And that was Mama's daddy, along with the Craig fellow. They're the two that owned it.
But that's where Lewis Motors started.
But Lewis Motors didn't have anything to do with Craig and Wilson, except that when Lewis Motors started, they opened it up in that old livery, that building where the livery stable was. We used to go over there when I was a little boy though, and they had the part that was a barn had maybe 6 places that were probably, well, maybe 30 or 40 feet wide and maybe 100 feet long, and they would bring horses or mules or whatever in there, and they would tie them to, they had hay lofts and feed troughs along the side, and they'd tie them up there, and they would sell them out of there. But, you know, there was, of course, when I was old enough to go up there, it wasn't like it was during the Craig and Wilson time, but they had leased it to a horse trader, and they went to Tennessee and all kinds of places, and they would buy mules and horses and bring them back up there, not by the hundreds of thousands, but they would, you know, maybe a truckload or two.
Yeah.
And they would then sell them to people who would come up and shop for them. But sometimes when they had some that were rideable, they'd let us ride in those places, just bareback with an old rope halter on the horse or the mule. Most time it was a mule that had a backbone, real sharp.
Sharp as a razor.
Yeah. That's fun.
But but back up. Tell him about the horse that you bought and kept in the basement on Morris Street.
Well, I ended up maybe towards the end of World War II. Mama let me buy a horse up there, and I brought it home, and I had it. You may have heard some wild tales about it in the basement, but it was rare that it ever went in the basement. But I used to. There was some furniture down there, and I cut grass and put it in the drawers, in the chest of drawers, and let it cure out some. But I tied the horse out in the back, where the garden was, and he was lucky when he got fed real good, because I didn't know much, but you know, they made sure that I fed him right. But I didn't know anything. I didn't know much about buying a horse.
Didn't he die?
What'd you do with the horse?
I sold him, but I think I bought him for like $25, and the horse had cancer. He had, well, I say he had a cancer. He had a saddle sore on his back. Well, I didn't ever ride this. I never did have a saddle to ride him anyway. We always rode bareback. But he had a spot on his back that was kind of sore, and I sold him to somebody over in Stanley. And he saw me, oh gosh, a year or so later, and said the horse had died. Said he had had the vet out there, and the vet told him the horse had cancer.
The question is, how much did you sell the horse for?
I think I sold him for about $25.
Oh, okay.
Well, now tell them about the wash pot of your mother's that you sold. You don't remember that?
I remember that. My butt would never forget.
He sold the wash pot, his mama's wash pot, iron wash pot.
For the way we wash clothes.
Yeah. And she made him go get it and carry it back by himself home.
How old were you then?
Not old enough to be very smart.
About 10, I think.
But you got smarter after that.
Yeah, that was part of his,
That
was his process of growing up.
My rear end got smarter. But that was during World War II.
Yeah.
And everybody was wanting to buy metal and all. Well, on Saturday mornings, we had this great old big black wash pot. It was cast iron. He built a fire, and you had that thing full of water, and then a couple tin tubs, and you heat that water up in that wash pot with the fire going under it.
Lye soap
Yeah.
and a stick to get the clothes out because they were too hot to handle. You had to dip them out.
And then you transfer them into one tub of water.
But I bet your fanny was hot as that water was when your mama got through with it.
Well, I learned not to do that. I learned that was a mistake. I'll tell you what, the man that bought it from you learned a pretty good lesson too.
I bet so.
Not to buy from a kid.
Yeah. Especially to pay him just nothing hardly.
Yeah.
For something that was real bad.
Now, Uncle Floyd was Henry F., is that right? Is that who?
You're talking about?
Your Uncle Floyd, not my Uncle Floyd.
Yeah, my Uncle Floyd was Henry F.
Okay.
And he was Daddy's brother.
Right.
And they were both born in Springfield. And then Uncle Floyd lived in Columbia all his life.
Did you know him?
I knew Uncle Floyd extremely well.
Yeah.
And I knew Uncle Wilford pretty well, but
He was older, wasn't he? Is he the one that married Aunt Murdy?
That was, he was a dent.
Oh, okay.
Where did Uncle Wilford live? Was he in Columbia
He lived
also?
in Columbia also.
Okay.
He lived uptown. He was a salesman.
Yeah.
Of all kinds of natures. He had 3 or 4 sons, and Uncle Floyd and Aunt Ada didn't have any children. And Aunt Bertie, who was Uncle Floyd and Uncle Wilford and Daddy's sister. She lived in Columbia also. She was married to a dent.
Now your grandfather's name was it James? Is that right?
You're talking about on the Jumper side or the Wilson side?
On the Jumper side.
I'm pretty sure it was James. Jim or James.
James. And he married Sarah Leapart.
I'm not sure.
I think was her name.
I don't remember.
I believe that's where I remember the
I've
name.
seen the grave markings for those. So after World War.
The only time I ever had much knowledge with any of the other jumpers there in the family, we went to Springfield one time. Drove a car down there. Uncle Bill and Uncle Floyd and Mom and I, we were ill and met all those folks. And that wasn't too long after World War II was over, and they had a big farm in Springfield. And but they sure were real nice people. I just never did have much dealings with them. Although I did have a professor at Clemson whose name was Jumper. And in fact, after he was at Clemson for some good long time, the last time I heard from him, he was a professor at Wake Forest. And at Clemson, he was a history professor.
Was he related to you?
Yeah.
What kind of grade did you get?
Well, probably an A.
Oh, come on now.
What grade did you deserve?
Probably an A+.
At the end of World War II, you finished at Gastonia High School.
In 1949.
1949. And
started at Clemson in the fall of 1949.
Right after that.
Went to it for a year. And then went into the Navy in 1950.
What month in 1950?
December.
So it was after the beginning of the Korean War.
Yeah. And was there for 4 years. Or right at 4 years. It got over. We got out a couple months early.
Yeah. And the war started in, if I remember right, June of, not remember, but if I read correctly, June of 1950.
I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yeah. And then you were there, and you went where in the Navy?
Well, I went to San Diego to boot camp, and then I waited. I would have been willing to have gone just about anywhere after we graduated, because we went to the, I don't remember what they call it, the debarkation center or whatever it was. And they called all the folks that had graduated in recent days were there, and they would get up and they would call your name out and give you an assignment. And at the end of the day, if you hadn't gotten an assignment, you had night mess cooking.
Mm.
So he worked in the galley all night, and then went back over there the next day. Well, I didn't get the call the first day, and I didn't get called the second day. And I would have gladly volunteered to go on a submarine or something.
How long were you there?
But I think the third day, I didn't get shipped out, but the third day, I got an assignment to go to Naval Aviation Fundamental School in Jacksonville, Florida. And that was for, I think I went down there maybe boot camp, I think it was 14 weeks. And I went from boot camp to Jacksonville, and that lasted for maybe 9 or 12 weeks or something like that. And then I was sent to Naval Aviation A School in Memphis, and that lasted from September until, gosh, it was in the winter. It was in the maybe like December or January, and I was assigned then to the Military Air Transport Squadron 8, and it just said FPO, Fleet Post. It was a Fleet Post Office address in San Francisco and Oakland, and we went out there, and they put us aboard a ship, and we went and shipped us to Hawaii, and that's where I didn't know where VRA was, but that's where it was. It was a squadron assigned to the Military Air Transport Service, and the Military Air Transport Service had Navy squadrons and Air Force squadrons, and we were I believe we were the only Navy Air Transport Squadron at Hickam Field at that time. But later there became another one, VR-7 and VR-8 both. But I stayed in Hawaii for about a year, and then was shipped to Kwajalein. That's where the base was that kind of supplied. You've heard of Annie Weetok, where the atomic bombs were first exploded. Well, anyway, the Navy Kwajalein was shaped like a boomerang, and it was a mile long, and then it had a little quarter of a mile tip on it, and the airfield was on that mile, and then the quarter mile part was where all the mess hall and the barracks and that sort of stuff was. And that was interesting. We flew, we serviced, it was a detachment that was made up of Navy people and Air Force people. And we serviced all the planes that were in the MATS squadrons, and we also serviced all the planes that were being flown over to Vietnam. That's when it was a French operation, and the U.S. was supplying them with old World War II airplanes, B-17s and B-24s and A-26s and all that kind of good stuff. And if they landed there, we would refuel them, and if something was wrong with them, we'd fix them. But then every once in a while, we got an opportunity to go out on the flights too. And we flew to Guam, and then about every other plane, well, not every other one, but we'd send a plane or two to the Philippines. And then most of them would go to take supplies to Korea and then bring the wounded back. they'd take them up to the Tripoli Army Hospital where they'd get treated. There weren't no girls down there.
How long were you there in Hawaii? A year?
I was on Kwajalein probably 9 months or so,
Kwajalein.
something like that.
Yeah.
They had a movie theater there, and it was there was a little bit of a place. It was kind of sloped, and they built some bleachers out there, and they put a movie screen up down at the end of it, and they'd show a movie out there every night. But if you went out there to see that movie, the one thing you were sure to do would be to take your poncho and your pith helmet, because the chances were it would rain. But that was quite an experience. But now the time in Hawaii was pretty nice.
Yeah. Well, if you were in Hawaii for a year and then Kwajalein for, you said, I think 9 months, what did you do the rest of the time?
Well, when I came back to Hawaii, I spent another year or so there.
Yeah.
That was the main places. The only time they ever got shot at
In Hawaii?
was in Hawaii.
What were you doing wrong to get
I
shot at?
wasn't doing anything wrong. We had, there was a fellow had a car, and we had loaded up in that car and gone all over to the side of the island that was, I don't know, it was the windward or leeward or something like that, but there wasn't hardly any kind of people there. But there was one town you would go through, and it would have been about like going down Main Street in Dallas, about half of it.
Not much.
And you know, we didn't know anybody there. We hadn't done anything there. We didn't stop there. We didn't speed there. We didn't do anything wrong. But somebody decided that they didn't like us, and they fired at us.
You didn't stop to find out who it was?
Now we just decided we'd just go on. So we didn't have nothing to fire back with.
So you came back and got out of the Navy in 1954.
Yeah, and I started back to Clemson, and as soon as the second semester started in January, February, whenever it was. In the meantime, I worked for putting on roofs.
You worked with Gene Wilson, didn't you?
With Kling & Smith Roofing
Kling
Company.
and
He
Smith.
was from Pennsylvania. He was an old fellow, short and fat, and gray-headed. He but Gene Wilson was a cousin. He was his daddy would have been Geneva's brother, and he and I think Gene had been in the Navy also, hadn't he? And Felix Dover, he was closer to Floyd's age.
But Felix was Gene's brother-in-law.
Yeah, he is. In fact, Gene was married to Felix's sister, and then later on, we went to. We worked mainly down in Columbia and Chester and some of those towns, putting roofs on cotton mills. Where most of them had these tar and gravel roofs.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. But Clayton Wilson came to work with us. Well, I went to Clemson for the semester, and then worked with Kling Smith and Gene and Bud that summer also, and doing that same thing. And Clayton Wilson, who would have been Gene's uncle, had some health problems, and he started helping us too. And we were down in Columbia, and it was spent most of the summer there, and it probably never did get over 98 or 9. And we were on top of a roof.
That's a hot place.
It was hot.
Yeah.
And then when Mac was born,
That was in your last year at Clemson?
In the last year, it was the August before the last year.
Yeah. Mac was 6 months old when Daddy graduated.
Okay.
I got a job working for Duke Power Company, helping them build the Allen Steam Plant over here on the Catawba River.
Yeah.
And they had some of the engineering students from Clemson and State, mostly Clemson. I don't think they liked the State, was too good. But we worked in the testing department over there. And it would have been awful hard for us to made it that senior year without being able to work with them.
That was great.
And I think
Well, you worked for them when we came home. When Mac was born, we were here for the summer. Mac was born in August, and that's when you worked for Duke Power during that summer time.
I was thinking it was the year that Mac was born.
Well, it was. Mac was born that summer, and we were home.
It was not. I didn't make it to the hospital on time, did I?
Oh yeah.
Are you sure? I thought Floyd went with you a little. Maybe she knew you were born then. This was one of them.
You made it eventually.
He did. He did.
But we lived when, after graduating from Clemson, we worked for Wicks that summer, and we lived up at 224 North Morris Street, where I lived when after Daddy died. We moved back from Cherry Street to Morris Street. That's where I had the horse. And anyway, Aunt Tara Little, lived next door, and she had died by then.
No.
Yeah, tell you, well, maybe she didn't. Maybe she was living in Hillcrest, but Henry and Doll Spurrier.
Later on, but before then there was another couple that lived there.
Well, the thing about it, when we lived there with Mac, he was just the year that
on Morris Street.
Had his first birthday. Henry and Doll Spurrier had him so spoiled.
And Mac Spurrier. He thought, there was too many adults in Mac's young life. I think that's what ruined him.
So you're saying he's ruined?
Yeah. That's what your mama said. I said spoiled.
We'll go back and listen to it later.
Oh. But Janice and Mac had, Mac Spurrier came by the house and picked Mac up. There was a big fire up at High Shoals. And they were going to ride up there and see it. And they took Mac with them. And little did they know, or we know, that that's where Floyd was, taking movies of the fire
And
for
this-
WBTV.
WBTV.
This was in what year, roughly?
60s. Yeah.
59 or 60. It was,
And Henry had come home from work, and I told him Mac had gone, with them, and they'd gone up to see the fire, and we didn't even know that's where Floyd was, and the phone rang, and it was Mother, and Mother said, "Are y'all watching TV?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, there is a fire up at High Shoals, and Floyd has been killed. Floyd has died." And that's the first we knew about it.
And they were there, but they didn't know what was going on.
they didn't know that, but about the same time that happened, we had folks drive up to the front door, and it was Mother,
Faye.
and
Bill.
Bill, and maybe was it the preacher with them?
I don't think so. I think it.
And we went to, and they told us about it, and we went to.
You went to the funeral home.
I think your mama's call it transpired maybe before I got home, hadn't it?
No, you were already home. We were talking about what we were going to have for supper. I remember it like it was yesterday.
Well, anyway, the first I remember having heard about it was when Mom and Bill.
No, they called after Mother did and said they were coming and they wanted you to go with them and y'all were going to identify the body.
Well, we went to the morgue at Lincoln.
But he was taking pictures, and we have a video of when he was taking the pictures. That's on part of some of the film.
Yeah.
He was taking the pictures, and all of a sudden he felt like he couldn't get his breath, and there was a minister there close by, and he took Floyd to a house close by so he could lay down. And after a while he said he was feeling better and he wanted to go back and finish his film. And he went back and started taking more pictures, and he fell and hit the bumper of the car, and he died right there.
Mm.
But on that video, you can the smoke is you can see it swirling around the camera right up. It was
Long Shoals, wasn't it?
maybe it was Long Shoals. I couldn't remember whether it was High Shoals or Long Shoals. I believe you're right. But it was an old mill that was on fire.
And you think that was around 1960?
It was. We moved back. I had left working at Wicks, and we went to Greensboro.
Yeah.
And we came back to work at Wicks in 1960, and that was in March or April of 1960 or somewhere along in there.
Very shortly.
And that's when that was the time that it wasn't at Wicks. We came to
P-Laura.
for the Douglas Aircraft Company.
Yeah.
And it was in 1960.
And we both commented on how thankful we were that we had already moved back here. Had we lived in Greensboro and got the message that he had died, it would have been 10 times harder trying to get back.
But it was just, that was a sad time.
It really was bad. And Faye had 3 children, so it was very hard on them. I believe it's all.
There couldn't have ever been a finer man than Floyd.
But
He
you
was
would,
a real fine Christian.
You were talking about the golf clubs the other day. I remember exactly how all that happened. Floyd sold his golf clubs to a young man. I think he ran an ad in the paper or something and sold those golf clubs, and this young man bought them. And after Floyd died, we got a call from this young man, and he said, I bought those golf clubs from your brother, and I know you would love to have them, and I'm going to bring them to you. And he came by the house on Morris Street and brought the golf clubs to Daddy. So it was really kind of him.